Can I just ask, how many of you are new to Horrorcon today and weren't here yesterday? Quite a few? All right, well we did something yesterday and we wondered whether we should vary the questions or do something different. So we're going to mix and match and see how far we get. Let me ask you what you were doing and where you were in the early 1980s when this job came to you.
So in the year before I got this part in A Nightmare on Elm Street, I went to college and I went to Stanford at a university in Palo Alto, California, and I was going to auditions on the weekends. I would drive to Los Angeles to get jobs, and I got a couple of small parts. Well, not small parts, but parts in small movies. And I got a part in a movie of the week, and I did a commercial for Tab. You know, so I kept myself going with that kind of work. And then I had taken like a week off to audition, and I saw this horror movie, and I didn't really know what it was, and I said, okay, I'll go in. And my agents were like, well, you know, we don't know anything about the director, we don't know anything about anybody involved in this picture. They have John Saxon who's playing the father, and that gave it so much credibility. Just getting John Saxon's name attached made the film seem like, oh, it's, you know, something. So I went in, and I had a couple of callbacks. My last callback was with Amanda Wyss, and we sat side by side like this, and Wes Craven was in front of us, and we did a really great audition, and he just turned to us and said, well, thank you, you both got the parts. And that never happens in Hollywood. You never get to hear right there in the room. And he told us that we were going to play Nancy and Tina.
And how much homework did you have to do? How much homework could you do on a project that was so unique and so unusual?
You mean in terms of researching the character and all of that? Well, I spent some time with Ronnie Blakely as my mother, which I mentioned yesterday. I don't want to bore you, but so we went out several times together, and we just kind of investigated our mother-daughter relationship, which isn't very good, as you can tell in the movie. So we practiced going to the mall, buying a fancy dress for like our version of the prom, and we just stayed in character the whole time. We were at one of these fancy new malls in Los Angeles called the Galleria, and it was very famous back then as one of the big indoor malls. So we did that, and then Johnny Depp came over to my house one day, and we decided to go up to the Griffith Park Observatory, where I didn't think of it then, but it was close to my house, and it was a nice place to kind of walk around, and I thought, okay, you know, we can just get to know each other. And later, it dawned on me that that was where Natalie Wood and James Dean made, Rebel Without a Cause. And that the location is really beautiful. If you have a chance to go to Griffith Park Observatory, there's a lot of film history there as well. And I kind of think that sometimes I might have like cast a spell on our movie by just kind of taking Johnny up there, and it was a really kind of a magical thing. And he was a really nice person, and we just talked about, you know, Nancy and Johnny and just about the movie in general.
Just trying to lay the groundwork for the characters.
Well, I didn't like do much groundwork. I wish I had. But I mean, at the time, I was in a relationship, and he was too. You know, he had come from Florida not long before he even got the part, and the casting director had seen him playing his guitar in a club in LA, and her name was Annette Bening. No, not Annette Bening. Annette. I can't remember her last name now. But she said, there's this guy, he's playing guitar, and he played guitar last night at this really divey bar in Hollywood, and he just had something about him. He was just really, you know, had so much soul, and he was a really great looking guy. So I've asked him to come in and audition for Nightmare on Elm Street, and he came in, and kind of the rest is history. If you've seen my documentary, you'll know that Wes Craven just happened to have his daughter Jessica there with him that day when Johnny came in to audition, and Wes let her do the line readings for the Nancy part, because I wasn't there during those auditions for Johnny, and she read with Johnny Depp, and the minute he left the room, she's like, Dad, you have to hire him. And it was just a feeling about Johnny Depp he was just so kind, and He was really such a soft-spoken person and very respectful and very humble person, very polite, and just so different than what you would expect to be in that role, because the role was really written for kind of a jock who was very kind of sure of himself, and he wore a Letterman's jacket, he's watching Miss America pageant. So hiring Johnny Depp was really kind of the opposite of what I think had been written on the paper, and I think it's one of the reasons why he was really successful in that part, and you really feel bad when Johnny doesn't make it.
How involved were you, or otherwise, or how much were you around when Robert Englund was being introduced, whether he was in costume or not, whether he was in character or not? Because he's in the film very briefly, he's scattered in and out. You said 6 minutes, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I remember the first day of work or maybe a day before we all got there. We didn't have a lot of time to rehearse, so we just got to the stage where we were gonna do most of the filming. It was at the old, it was called Desilu Studios, which is where they had done I Love Lucy. And it was in terrible disrepair. It was completely falling down. Everything was really shabby, and it was kind of drafty and dingy and bad everywhere. But yet, with all these lively people, to me, it's kind of like your fond memories of camp, and then you go back to camp and you just see how awful it was. But Robert came in one day, and I was like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "I'm Robert Englund." I'm like, "Oh, what part are you playing?" And he's like, "I'm playing Freddy Krueger." And I was like, "Oh, great," And I didn't really ever see him again until the day he worked, and they said, "Oh, Robert's getting his makeup on. You can see him later." And it was on the set. And I saw him literally when he walked out in the dungeon. He pulls away the curtain and then he's standing there. So I hadn't even had a chance to see him in his makeup ever until I actually worked with him in the makeup that day.
So the deathless question that we have to ask is, how big of a shock was it? How big of an impact was it? And did it ever cross over where you're thinking, I don't want to be around this guy?
It had a huge impact. To me, the burn makeup wasn't as scary as his posture. The way that he stood, and you see it in all the classic photos, he stood like somebody who's just about to attack you, and his body language is just incredibly menacing. The burn makeup didn't really bother me very much at all, and then everything with the glove, he just wore it so casually, and he always was wearing it like it was just part of him. That was the scariest part for me. He just had so much facility with this thing that was so deadly. And if I had any nightmares at all in the last 30 years, they've mostly been about the glove. The glove, yeah.
I'm going to open it up to questions to you guys after one more question from me. When you are in a movie and you're working and it's a job, does the fact that you're working with prosthetics and special effects and makeup effects and everything else and gory killings, does that ever bleed into the real world, or is it just, do you separate the two and one is the job and one is when you're going home again at night? Do they cross over or not?
I think it's hard. It's harder for me to actually watch a movie in the theater, in the cinema, and separate that from my life than it is to work. When you're working, there's so much going on every day that doesn't include the scary things that you're shooting. The whole day out of 12 hours, maybe 1 hour is spent actually engaging in that drama and acting your part. 11 hours is spent waiting and in your costume and joking around with Robert Englund, and so it's easy to separate work from reality. But I find that the reality on the screen is harder for me to kind of walk away from, and I rarely see horror movies as a result because I don't really want to have a lot of those sadistic images in my head, because I do spend a lot of time alone in my house and I feel isolated already, or I have to walk someplace at night alone, and I feel that those images do crop up again and cause me to be afraid. And I think fear is one of the hardest emotions to wrestle with as a woman in my society anyway.
So the films are doing their job.
These films are doing their job, yeah.
Okay, question. Susan has a question for me. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I was just wondering if you'd seen the remake and if you think it's as good as the original, or if you think the original still holds its own.
You know, I didn't and never have seen the remake. I just, to me, again, it's like kind of the things I put in my head. I decided that I did not want to have another person as Freddy Krueger in my imagination, so that I didn't have to kind of choose or make any kinds of judgments. So it's easier to just not have to make the judgment. So I didn't see it, and I'm glad I didn't.
Another question? Making me run upstairs. I'm not built for this.
Oh, look, he's.
Hiya. Was there a point where you thought, I've actually made it, this movie is massive, and was there a point where you thought, it's actually going around the world, I can't believe this?
No, I never have. I mean, it's been a process that's taken 30 years, so it's like only now do I feel like it has achieved this classic, part of my voice is getting weak, this classic reputation. Maybe the last 10 years I've really noticed it, but I'd say the first 15 years I wasn't aware of it at all being like that. You know, being in a horror movie in the 80s was not a very prestigious kind of thing to be involved with, so I did have to, you know, I had to work hard trying to convince people to go see it. And frankly, in my professional life, I would meet a lot of people who just wouldn't go see a horror movie. Like, that wasn't even going to be part of their reality, and those were the people that were making all the decisions in Hollywood. So it was a tough sell. And then as it became, you know, as Freddy Krueger became this pop icon, then I noticed that more people in Hollywood kind of looked at it as a legitimate genre and a legitimate kind of money-making, but also movie-making endeavor. And now, I mean, people are falling over themselves trying to make a good horror movie, and I'm like, where were you in 1985 when I needed a job, you know? That now, like, everyone is trying to find a great idea for a horror movie, and I'm like laughing because it's something that you can't really just pull out of thin air, you know, obviously. There would be a lot more better ones.
Another question? I can't see anybody over there, so if you wait.
I know, I'm sorry you guys, hello.
Was there any hesitation going back for a new nightmare, knowing that it would encompass parts of your actual life in it?
I had a lot of misgivings. Well, because I thought that the idea wouldn't really go over very well with the audience. You know, it's hard to break the fourth wall. It's hard to bring the audience in that way. And no one had ever made a movie where, you know, that whole storyline just had never been tried before. Obviously, because Wes Craven likes to come up with ideas that no one has ever thought of before. And I know he worked on that idea for a long time before he finally got a script that, you know, somebody would shoot. And so I told Wes, I said, I just feel really uncomfortable playing myself. I don't really like it. I don't like the idea of it. And I know he argued with me and he convinced me, but I don't really remember his exact words. I think he was like, you know, this is going to be a much better production. We're going to have Robert Englund. I'm going to play myself. And then when he, you know, assured me that everyone was on board and I wasn't going to be just like hanging out there to dry by myself, that everyone was going to do it, then I thought it was a good idea. But it did make me uncomfortable when I first read the script. The first script too was like a lot weirder than the one that we ended up shooting. It had a lot of, like, I had a different character who really was stalking me, like somebody who was really like in this crazy weird van, like kind of roaming the streets. And it had a more tawdry kind of, I don't know, like Freddy wasn't as magnificent as he was in the final the movie that you guys saw. I mean, Freddy was so powerful and so great in Nightmare 7. Did I answer your question? Yeah, okay.
Question from over here? I can't see it.
It's so dark over there. It's like a galaxy far, far away. Hi. Hi. Hello. From
the darkness. I was just wondering, of all the nightmare films, do you have a favourite scene that you shot?
Where are you?
I'm in the dark.
Oh, you're up there. Okay.
Yeah.
So many are my favorite. It's like your children. It's hard to pick a favorite. But of course, I think the bathtub scene is the one that turned out the best for me. I think it just, to me, is like one of the best scenes ever shot in scary movie history. The other scenes I really like I said, yesterday, I love action. I love fighting with Freddy. So all the battles that I had with him, where in Nightmare 1, where we're on the bed and the pillow explodes and the feathers are flying and we're wrestling and falling on the ground. I love all those scenes. I mean, because they took a lot of practice, and Robert and I rehearsed over and over and over again just to make it just right, so that his glove was in the right position. It was very like dance, and I grew up dancing ballet, and so whenever we had a chance to choreograph something, we spent several hours doing it. And we rarely used stunt people in those scenes. In the seventh movie, in the dungeon, we had another big fight scene that I really, really loved doing, with the eels and the fiery candelabra, and that I get to say "fuck you." And I think that was really great. I like it when Nancy kind of breaks out of her goody two shoes, pajamas, gets wild.
Okay, another question. Any at the back? I'll do you first. I'll come to you 2 in a minute.
Hi, thanks for coming, by the way. Just a quick question. You played an alien in Star Trek Into Darkness. What was that like, and how did you deal with that, putting all the makeup on?
So, my husband and I were contracted to do all the makeup effects for Star Trek Into Darkness, and it was fun. I mean, but it was frustrating because they didn't want to give us like the huge budgets to make some of the really elaborate makeup effects that we wanted to do, and we were kind of constrained. So at one point they were looking for more makeup effects. Like, we need, I know you've paid for 5 of these creatures, but can we somehow get a couple thrown in for free, kind of idea? And my husband is like, well, not really. They take, it's a lot of time and effort to create a character. But we remembered that, like, a few years back, we had done some research to create a character for a movie that never got made, and it was like a last Starfighter kind of movie, and we had just done a kind of a test on this character, where it was like a big watermelon head, and it was like a leader of some like alien force. And so my husband said, well, we do have a makeup that we have put together, but it's never been in a movie before, and we could put it on Heather. She's the only person that can wear it. And I don't have enough money to like even redesign it for another actor. It just fits Heather. And so J.J. Abrams was like, well, that's fine. She can play the part. And so we got the makeup back out of storage, and we repainted it. I mean, we reran it and all the materials so it was fresh and everything. We remade a new color pattern for that character to wear. And so then I get to go and get fitted for my costume, and then, I actually worked for 3 or 4 days on the set. It was wonderful. I got to be on the set with Benedict Cumberbatch when he's doing that scene in the brig, but in the final cut, I'm just there for just a moment. And but it was really thrilling working on the set of Star Trek. I mean, gosh, it was a dream come true. And that movie, we worked on that movie for about 8 months. So we could have made 3 or 4 Nightmares on Elm Street in the time that it took to make one of those movies. There's so much planning involved, and so many meetings, and so many approvals, and it's run like an army, from the top down with generals, and we were, just one part of a large, massive army that just kind of makes these giant, big budget films. But it was fun, and it was great to meet, J.J. Abrams and work with him.
Hi, Heather. Over
Hi.
here, straight ahead.
Yeah,
Dead ahead at the top.
there you are.
Horror has always felt, as a genre, ahead of its time in terms of gender equality, a lot of female leads, that kind of thing. And I just wondered, from your point of view in the industry, how it's changed from an actress's point of view from the 80s to now, and do you feel like it's moving in the right direction generally?
Oh, definitely moving in the right direction. There were not that many women's parts, aside, the girlfriends and the wives and the assistants and the secretaries, and I mean, there's always those parts, but in terms of the leading roles, especially for actresses more my age and older, I find that those parts are really abundant now, and I do think that, I just think that the people writing the stories in those days were men, and men were their main characters, and so now we see more women writing, more women directing, and as a result, more women are populating the stories as lead characters. But it's way better. It's so much better. And if you're a woman who wants to be a writer or director, you're not kind of, shushed aside and like said, okay, maybe someday. I mean, people really are developing careers, and it's hard to say that in America, women have been discriminated against for so long in this industry, but it's still, people are working very hard to correct it.
Okay, another question? You don't have to wait because I can't. Okay.
Hi. Just wanted to ask you about censorship. You personally, would you be more or less conservative with censorship in the horror genre?
Well, my husband and I now work on American Horror Story, and I ask myself this question all the time because, part of me as a mother and someone who is worried about nurturing people, I feel like sometimes the images that we present in our society aren't really helping us out. I mean, especially in American Horror Story, I find taboos that have been established in our culture for thousands of years can kind of just get thrown out, in a 60-minute episode, something that you've actually kind of... I just think there's certain taboos that I'm really surprised they get kind of turned over, broken. And yet I think, well, it is harming anybody. I mean, is anyone being harmed by the violence and the bloodshed and the inhumanity and the sadism of it? And I guess, my final answer would be yes. I mean, it is harming us because look at our world is just becoming, maybe it's just devolving into a point of no return. But I don't want to be I don't want to be the censor. That's, once you say, yes, there should be censorship, then you're like, okay, well, who's qualified to do it? And then I can't come up with a good answer. So I guess we just let people be free, and I'm not sure where it's going to end, but I certainly know that today, things that I think are beyond the pale are kind of mainstream. And so I know that I'm probably the worst person to ask that question. But I don't know, maybe sometimes I feel everything's on a pendulum. There's that theory too, where we go swing this way and then we swing that way. Maybe we'll have Victorian England again at some point in the future, after we're having this period that we're having now, where everything is acceptable. I don't know.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left, so we're coming to the end of the audience questions.
Hey Heather.
Hello.
Just outside Nightmare, out of all your other work, who's your favorite character, in The Butterfly Room or Shocker or Home even? Who did you enjoy playing?
Who I really like to play?
Yeah.
Well, I did a television series in America in 1989, and I played Marie on a show called Just the 10 of Us, and I played a young girl who wanted to be a nun, and she was so pure, and, well, the thing is, she wasn't that pure thinking, but she just wanted to be, and she was really a sweet character, and I loved playing her. I got to... we did about 50 episodes of that show, and each time we developed her a little bit more, because she's tortured, She wants to be a nun, but yet she likes boys, It's like one of those silly characters, but being able to be, try to be funny and take very, comedy sitcoms are very hard to actually do because the timing is so important and you have to practice and rehearse, days and days and days just for your 22-minute episode. And that process is really, really fun, and you don't get that in film. You don't get to do that in, on movies.
Hi.
Hi.
Between Nightmare 3 and Nightmare 7, did you keep tabs on the series or the franchise?
I really didn't. I I'm embarrassed to say I haven't even seen all of those ones in between. I've seen parts of them, but I've never like sat through each one. You know, I'm gonna watch this whole thing. I usually just go in to see like my friends' scenes, and then I don't watch the rest of it. I'm embarrassed to say that, but I think in my mind it got to be like enough already. You know, I think I just was like, are you kidding me? They're making another one. I didn't pay attention at all.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I was going to ask if you got to a point where you thought, no, you've done too much now.
Well, I think at the time too, I mean, I had 2 kids, and who were both like kids under the age of 3. And I don't know if any of you are parents, but you don't have time to do anything, much less follow Nightmare on Elm Street series. I mean, I was not getting any sleep, and you know, trying to do your best you can. I used to have a sign on my car that said "Kill your television," because it wasn't so much that I just wanted to get rid of my television; it's that I never turned my television on. So I'm pretty much. I have absolutely no idea what happened between 1991 and 1997. I don't have any concept of what was going on in pop culture.
We've got time for a couple of very quick final questions before we have to wrap up. So this is it. This is your last chance.
Oh, there's one up there, I see. Okay.
I'll come to this lady and then I'll come to you. You've got the last question.
Hi Heather.
Hello.
Given the unique narrative of Nightmare on Elm Street, I just want to know if you've ever had a nightmare about Freddy Krueger. Perhaps if that disturbed you more than it would normally with other figures from horror.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you. My first real Freddy nightmare was about the claw. Just coming too close and always like coming too close. And it was more just like the swiping of the claw. I think it happened too much and I had a nightmare about that. But then I had a nightmare about Patricia Arquette when we were doing Nightmare 3, where we were kind of like on a ship. It was very much like a metaphor for the movie itself. And the ship is rocking in like really horrible seas, and she's about to like go overboard, and I have to like save her, and then Freddy's there, of course, like trying to kill her, and it was like a crazy dream, and I'll never forget it. And then after Nightmare 7, the scene when I get the tongue wrapped around my head, it was actually extremely distressing to me in my real life. And there was something about that day. All of the special effects makeup people were really crude, and like I felt like, I can say this like 30 years later, but they really offended me. And as you can imagine, all the jokes about a giant long, you know, phallic symbol being wrapped around my head 4 times with lots of KY jelly. Like the day was just like non-stop jokes that you could never get away with now. Nowadays they would just kick them off the set and just, but back then, you know, women had to suffer a lot of that kind of just like really low-level sexual bullshit, you know, at work. And so that kind of just got internalized to me, and I, you know, you have to smile and be laugh. Oh, you're so funny, asshole. And so, like maybe a month or 2 after the show was done, my husband finds me kneeling in front of the fireplace, sleepwalking. I don't really have a fireplace. I have like one of those little Swedish fireplaces that's made out of metal, and I'm just trying to pull the tongues off of me, just pull them, like get them off, like having this total attack of panic about this tongue wrapped around my head. And he's like, Heather, you need some help. Like that is really like scared the shit out of me that you are sleepwalking, 1, and 2, you know, having this nightmare. I've never had a nightmare like that before. And so I actually told him, like I said, I think you're right. And so I ended up going, I didn't really go to a psychiatrist or anything, but I ended up talking to somebody who I just had to get it off my chest, like how humiliated I was and how much it had hurt my feelings and how I wish like Wes had stood up for me, and that I felt like, and so that, because it was based in real life, has actually been, was one of the most, I think, traumatic events of my nightmare experience. And it was like, as an observer, you would have thought it was nothing. But I do think it's a good lesson, you know, even if you think you're being, you know, entertaining, you know, there's always someone that might be the butt of that joke. And so as a result, I tell my kids, you know, don't ever use somebody as kind of the subject of a joke, especially a sexually charged joke, because you know, we're all extremely fragile, and I didn't think I would be that fragile, but I think, you know, the proof was that I was, you know.
How you doing? With all the time and budget constraints of Nightmare on Elm Street 3,
Where are you?
Hello, here.
Oh, there you are, okay.
How you doing? With all the time and budget constraints of Nightmare on Elm Street 3, the pressure was really on the cast and the crew to get things done.
Right.
And that went through Chuck Russell. Did you ever want to go Chuck Norris on Chuck Russell?
I mean, he had a hard job. You know, he had like all of these kids, and a lot of the kids hadn't had much experience at all. So it was like rounding up herding cats, as they say. I think we all like, and I was a little older than they were, but you know, he was taking a Wes Craven script and directing it, and I feel like he was setting him, you know, in a way, setting himself up for a really difficult job, because I was always going, well, Wes wouldn't do it that way, you know, and so I was probably his biggest problem, is because I was constantly challenging him, and that's the last thing that a director wants, is some, you know, I wasn't that old, I was like 24 maybe, like telling him like that Wes wouldn't do it that way. I mean, I don't think I ever said it outright like that, but the way he would set up a scene, I would always like I always felt let down, like, really? We're gonna do it this way? Okay. And ironically, it's the favorite of all the people. I mean, kids love Nightmare 3, right? It's so successful. But my attitude was very bad on the set. And I just didn't like him that much as a, you know, he didn't have the credibility to me that, you know, and so I think if he had any problems, it was probably me. And the budgets were tight, but all the movies that I've worked on have tight budgets, and it doesn't excuse poor, you know, behavior. And it was a tough movie, and lots of moving parts. And he did a great job, a really good job for what he had. And I did, I mean, I tried my best, and I did everything I could to make Nancy as she could be. But I think almost every day I went to work going, oh God, do I have to do this again? Oh, okay. I didn't have a good attitude. Sorry.
Well, no apologies required. You've had a fantastic attitude for Horrorcon. Thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for your answers. Our guest.
Thank you.